I'm going to be talking about trends and impacts and how these immigration enforcement and immigration policies and rhetoric that we have been seeing and have been implemented around the country is impacting the schools. So these trends that I'm going to be talking about are primarily driven, are primarily driven by two things. The first one is the immigration policies of this administration, and the second one is the xenophobic nativist rhetoric. So the immigration policies are designed to crack down on illegal immigration and reduce legal immigration, like Denzel was saying. So regarding eliminating illegal immigration, we have the border wall, the raids and deportations. Now, since this administration started, there's an order to report all removable aliens. That means anyone without documents. There's an increased criminalization and detention of immigrants, and an increasing number of border patrols and ICE agents. Regarding reducing legal immigration, we have the travel ban that was imposed on several Muslim-majority countries. There's been a reduction in the number of refugees coming to America. Now the maximum cap for 2019 is 30,000. The termination of TPS, temporary protected status, that it has the 300,000 foreign nationals have currently. The limiting of working visas, the termination and subsequent litigation of DACA, the deferred action for childhood arrivals, the policies that have been implemented to deter asylum seekers. These are zero tolerance, the separation of families at the border, and now this new policy of having people wait in Mexico. The public charge rule that hasn't been implemented yet, but we are seeing a lot of families not signing up for these programs that they really need. And there's been talk of ending the visa lottery and family reunification. So those are the immigration policies that have been enacted. And then we have the xenophobic, hateful rhetoric that we have been hearing since 2015, basically, calling immigrants criminals and rapists, members of gangs like MS-13, being drug dealers, the thought of immigrants bringing diseases into the country, immigrants as possible terrorists, and immigrants taking jobs and lowering wages for Americans. So these are the trends and impacts that we're seeing. Next slide. Thank you, Kira. And here you can see what is the impact in the classroom. So this slide shows the results from a 2018 study done by the UCLA Civil Rights Project on the effects of recent immigration enforcement on public school educators, that reveals that the majority of educators across the nation report that increased immigration enforcement has tremendously disrupted the learning environment in public schools. And you can see the list of things that they have reported. So basically, rising children not coming to school, demoralized students that face obstacles to attend college and therefore they're not excited and invested in their future, students who need to work to help after a parent has been deported, and students who are caring for younger siblings. And these things we're seeing around the country. So who is being impacted by these policies and this rhetoric? So what we're seeing is that the most impacted are the immigrant students and their families. It's important to know that there's 1 million undocumented immigrant students in America, but a larger number is 4.1 million U.S. citizen students with at least one undocumented parent. So just think about that, more than 4 million U.S. citizens that have one undocumented parent in risk of being deported at any moment. We also have students with a parent who has legal status in jeopardy, such as DACA or TPS. And then it's not only them, it's also their friends, their peers, their classmates, all students that are seeing how these families are dealing with these policies, the teachers, the counselors, the administrators, the school community, and the community at large. The quotes that you see on your screen are from Patricia Gandara, the co-director of the Civil Rights Project in UCLA, the project that I just mentioned. Next slide. Now, regarding hate, what we are seeing, what's the impact of this hateful rhetoric in schools? Hate in schools is an education week and documenting hate collaboration that found in a review of 472 verified incidents in K through 12 schools that most incidents targeted Black and Latino students, as well as those who are Jewish or Muslim. Most of the incidents involved hate speech, spoken and written, and the most common words were the N-word, various versions of build a wall, and go back to usually Mexico. While many of the reported incidents were peer-to-peer hate speech, teachers and school support staff have also been the source of bigoted statements. In the bottom picture, you can see about a dozen teachers from an elementary school in Idaho who dressed for Halloween as the border wall and Mexican stereotypes and posted the images on social media. Also, the picture in the middle is a deportation time game that was approved by the teacher in California. So that shows you just what we're seeing, as a consequence of this hateful rhetoric that is happening in our community. Next slide.
Okay, so thank you so much, Monica, for highlighting those statistics and some of those incidents. We're going to now talk about what educators can do to discuss immigration in the classroom and attempt to combat some of the anti-immigrant bias that we see and empower and educate students. So there are a number of teaching topics that relate to immigration, people who have refugee status or who are asylum seekers, the bias that those groups of people experience, and ways to take action in support of immigrants, migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers as allies, advocates, or activists. I'm going to circle back to many things on this slide, but this is just a good starting point and by no means an exhaustive list of the topics that can be used to introduce conversations about immigration. Each of those topics that I mentioned can definitely fit into lots of different places in the classroom, whether it's through literature that has characters who are immigrants or who may themselves have anti-immigrant bias. There are many examples of that across every single age level. Through research projects in history, looking at US and world history and the patterns of migration that we've seen throughout human history. Through personal narratives or oral histories, either by allowing students to reflect on their own experiences or even examining some of their family history around moving, migrating, or immigrating from one country to another. Certainly also through looking at legislation. There is a lengthy history in our country of legislation that has been enacted to address immigration, whether it is to limit immigration or to offer protection for certain groups of immigrants. There are many examples to be examined and an enormous wealth of documents looking at the political debate around immigration for over 150 years. Similarly, the current climate and the media coverage of immigration-related issues provides a wealth of opportunity to talk about anti-immigrant bias, to talk about the policies that have been previously mentioned on this call. And then finally, of course, having broad conversations about bias, hate, and discrimination, which can take place in the context of culture building in the classroom or through an academic discipline. And again, I'm going to circle back to each of these in a little bit more detail, but I just wanted to give an overview of the myriad of entry points for having conversations about immigration with students and specifically looking at anti-immigrant bias. Now let's take a look at it broken up by ages and stages. At every level of the K-12 experience, students can be having conversations that can build empathy and build more inclusive cultures, particularly when it comes to dealing with immigration and creating a classroom culture that is supportive for students who are affected by this immigration policy, whether it's directly or indirectly. Now, we have kind of each of these topics that were on our slide before broken up based on where it might be most appropriate to introduce these conversations. But given the context of individual classrooms, you can certainly move these around. I was an elementary school teacher, and while I may not have started my year with talking about stereotyping and scapegoating and immigrant policy or immigration policy and legislation, that is certainly where we ended up by the end of the year when I was teaching 4th and 5th grade. So you can kind of move these things around based on the academic content, as well as when you look across the year of culture building in a given classroom. So now I want to move on to kind of 3 big categories of work that educators can do, both by themselves and with their students, to address immigration in a comprehensive way and to build a more inclusive classroom culture. So let's start with what educators should be doing to prepare themselves and their classroom for these conversations. These are things that they can be doing outside of school time. Educators should be examining their school and class demographics. A lot of this information is available through various systems to teachers, and some of it is available publicly online to families as well, to just get to know the makeup of the school. What is the geographic origin of some of the people in the community in the school? What is the racial and ethnic makeup, the religious makeup of the school? These are just things to be aware of so that teachers and every educator in the building just knows who is coming to school with them every day. The next step beyond that would be to represent those students and families visually in the school. Some schools opt to put up flags that represent the countries that each student's family or each student themselves has come from. This is a very common practice in New York City high schools, but it certainly could be expanded to every single school. Similarly, representation in terms of cultural celebrations, holidays that may not be the ones that represent the teacher himself or herself, but represent the students in the building. That would be a great way to send visual cues that students are included, that students are validated and seen in their school. And next, as this is a simple one, but always worth mentioning, is that teachers can spend time getting to know their students and getting to know their families through informal conversations. Talking to students about what their life is like at home, what they do outside of school, what some of their family traditions are, who is in their family, and is their family all in one place? Is their family spread out? And getting to having these conversations in an informal way. Certainly not in a way that is interrogating or as a survey, which can seem very impersonal, but by having these conversations directly with students and with their family members, the teacher can better get to know his or her students and their families, and the students will feel more connected to their classroom culture. And then this last step here is particularly important, and it's an important one for educators, but really for all adults, is to spend time reflecting on the messages, the information that you consume about immigration. One way to do this might be to audit your social media news feed or your general news consumption. Is it all coming from 1 or 2 sources, or is it coming from a particular bias? And this can be an opportunity to then take action and expand the circle of information, the type of information that you're receiving, and to check in and make sure that you're getting multiple perspectives on the immigration debate. You can also do a similar kind of audit in personal conversations that you're having with other teachers in the school, members of your family, members of your community. And this does not have to be a formal process, but it's just a great practice to check in with yourself and what you are taking in, either from the media or from your community and family members. So I want to now move on to things that teachers can do with students. First, let's talk about building an inclusive and respectful culture. And this certainly is important in supporting students who are directly affected by the immigration debate and immigration policy, but this is also good practice for all teachers and all students. Setting ground rules. This is something that at ADL we do with every single workshop and program that we facilitate. We invite all participants, all members of the community to contribute to ground rules and then agree upon them before difficult conversations come up so that there's something to refer back to. Next, exploring identity. These are great things to do as culture building activities, giving students a chance to say who they are to their classmates through games, through arts and crafts, through storytelling, introducing their name or introducing something that is important to them. These kinds of activities help build empathy among students and just share a variety of experiences. Next is defining bias and discrimination. This is something that can be done across any academic discipline and age level. There are certainly student-friendly or children-friendly definitions of bias and discrimination if you're introducing this at the primary level, but those definitions certainly can get more complex as you move up. There are openings even in the science and maths where you may not think that this would come in. There are openings to see how bias affects every academic discipline. And it's a great opportunity for teachers to define it in the beginning of the year or in the beginning of a unit and then refer back to it as it comes up, because it certainly will, both in academic subjects and in culture building. Similarly, teaching empathy. Just letting students know that an important practice is to try to walk in someone else's shoes and consider somebody else's point of view. This is something the teacher can do as a think aloud, as a model for the classroom when they are practicing empathy, and something that a teacher can name when they see students practicing empathy. And it can be taught in very explicit lessons and then woven in throughout the school year. Going beyond just inclusivity and respect, teachers can be enriching their curriculum with diverse perspectives and discussions of bias to help their students make sense of what is happening around us in our society right now, in contemporary society, but also throughout history. Teaching students to be really critical consumers of media and exploring bias in all of the media they consume is a great place to start. Next, mirrors and windows. This may be a term some educators are familiar with. Mirrors refers to books or other types of media that you consume that reflects your experience. And for many immigrant students or students of color, they may not get a lot of mirrors in their classroom in the traditional academic content, but it's something that teachers can infuse more into their curriculum through books, through perspectives in history and more. And then on the other hand, windows, meaning that you're looking at cultures outside and identities outside of yourself. I know I am actually getting a little bit tight on time, so I'm going to try to move a little bit faster. But just also highlighting patterns in society throughout history and contemporary current events, and then also inviting experts into your classroom, either through in-person visits or through video chat, to share perspectives on immigration. And I want to mention, before I close out and turn this back over to my fellow panelists, that ADL does put out a number of resources, lesson plans, discussion guides that teachers can use, a whole curated list of books that address many topics, including immigration, but going beyond that as well, family discussion guides as well, and many other teaching tools so that teachers do not have to come up with this all on their own. There are resources that exist, and we are putting out more every single week.